Well, I must confess I feel somewhat startled these days to realise that we've actually been going now for 34 years. And when we set ourselves up, we were at that time the only centre in Britain devoted entirely to the person-centred approach. And reflecting on that very recently, I suspect that now we still are the only centre in Britain wholly devoted to the person-centred approach. There is a line of thought, and it's a perfectly respectable and defensible line of thought, which says that if you have a number of different therapeutic orientations represented in a centre, then that is likely to provide a better service for clients, because one approach will be suitable for one client and another approach may be suitable for another, and so on and so forth. But we've never really quite bought into that idea. We feel that as a centre, we are actually rendering perhaps an important service in offering clients this one particular approach.
For us, it's really important that when we work with clients, we can offer them a particular kind of relationship that enables them to find their own way towards whatever they want.
Yes, the person-centred approach, as you well know, majors, if you like, in the relationship which develops between the therapist and the client. We actually do believe that it is essentially the relationship which heals, and that the expertise of the person-centred counsellor, the person-centred therapist, really resides in his or her ability to create a particular kind of relationship with a client. The expertise, therefore, doesn't, if you like, reside principally in knowledge of personality or knowledge of particular dysfunctions of the human being. It resides essentially in the ability to create a particular kind of relationship. And the basis of our approach is, in many ways, I think, a very hopeful and optimistic notion of the human person, that we as human beings have inherently within us enormous capacities for living our human lives and making sense of them. But unfortunately, the kind of experiences which we've had, very often in relationship, make it very difficult for us to access the very wisdom which lies within us.
Yeah. And very important that it is a relationship in which they're not feeling judged.
Many approaches to therapy are, if you like, working on a kind of deficiency model. You know, that something is lacking, something is wrong. Whereas we tend to work on a completely different model, that there is sufficiency within the human being if they can, in fact, access it. So often a person who comes for help doesn't have really a very good opinion of themselves. In our jargon, they have a really very negative self-concept. When they think about themselves, they think of themselves as really pretty inadequate people, sometimes indeed even worthless people. And once they begin to experience that their therapist, perhaps really rather mysteriously, seems to actually really rather value them, conveys to them that they think they are of some worth, then gradually that very negative self-concept begins to shift. And I've often felt myself that there comes a kind of magic moment in the life of many a client where, instead of feeling that they are inherently pretty useless, pretty worthless, not up to much, they begin to sense, well, perhaps, just perhaps after all, they aren't so bad. One of the miracles of the person-centred therapeutic process is to watch as a person gradually relaxes into a relationship which is actually accepting of them, a relationship where the therapist is truly listening to them and trying to understand them. As that happens, they begin to feel gradually rather different about themselves.
Yeah, seeing that unfolding, seeing that client gradually move from what might be a very narrow black and white view of the world and opening up to possibilities and offering that both to themselves and to others that they're in relationship with. It really is quite a wonderful time in therapy when people begin to be able to do that.
Yes. Most people who come to see a therapist, in one way or another, want change. They want to be able to feel more constructively in touch with themselves, more able, in fact, to create a life for themselves which is worth living. They want change. They want to feel differently. They want to be able to act differently. But the strange thing is that it is when they feel accepted as they are, and what they experience is that they're not up to much, but when they feel they're accepted as they are, then change becomes possible. Carl Rogers, the primary originator of the approach, was often described, as a quiet revolutionary. And I think there is something about the person-centered approach which is really pretty kind of subversive. It is countercultural. And countercultural, it seems to me, in an extremely healthy way, because it's enabling individuals to feel that they have worth, that they do have validity, because, frankly, because they're human beings.
Yes.
People don't expect to be accepted. No. They don't expect to be listened to, let alone understood. I'm sure you've had the experience that I've had of somebody who may be in their late 50s saying something like, I think you're the first person I've ever met in my life who's listened to me.
Yes.
And I believe them.
Yes.
There are some people who think we're a kind of tea and sympathy people,
Yes.
I've heard people say things like, oh, the person-centered approach. Oh, yeah, that's what all therapists do before they get on with the real job.
And yet it's not a soft, cuddly approach, really, that sometimes it's said to be. It's very rigorous, and the training is rigorous, the research is rigorous that supports it.
There are those who see the person-centered approach as somehow really a kind of soft option. And they don't realise the immense amount of intellectual and research energy which has gone into the formulation of the approach and its development. Originally, the person-centered approach was probably the best researched approach of all. And in recent times, there has been a great deal more emphasis again upon the research to be able to offer the kind of relationship which the person-centered approach in fact is based upon is itself something which requires enormous discipline.
It's very important, I think, that anyone who is thinking either about being a client as here or maybe training to be a therapist understands that it is actually very demanding.
This is not a soft option. This is not intellectually lightweight. On the contrary, it can, as it were, hold its own with all the other traditions. One of my great joys is that we are again very much into the whole arena of training future therapists. So that the Norwich Centre is not only, as it were, offering counselling to the public, but we're actually offering opportunities for those who wish to equip themselves professionally in this particular way of working.